I woke up this week and the weather was in the 50s. I thought to myself, you know what? Let's put a hoodie on. Let's go outside. Let's take a walk because football season is in the air. Grant, football season is in the air. Everyone, welcome into Buckeye Cadence, the heartbeat of Ohio State athletics. My name is Blake Biscardi, your host with Grant Kincaid. Today, we have a massive episode for you previewing Ohio State's schedule for the 2026 season. Big Ten Media Days are ahead this week. We also have fall camp right around the corner. But Grant, the weather, it's feeling like football is in the air. You can feel this. This is that time of year in the summer. You're looking at the sports calendar. You're like, okay, we're almost there. We're almost there. It's like going through mud right now. But now once the weather starts to cool a little bit, you say, okay, here we go. Media days, fall camp. What were your thoughts this week when you woke up? You saw the weather was a little bit cooler. Media days, fall camp right around the corner.
Yeah, it's that you definitely get that feeling when you feel the crisp, morning air. The air smells different, beyond just feeling different. And like you said, we're approaching training camp, August right around the corner. We're going to see guys in pads and helmets hitting each other very soon. And this time of year brings about episodes like today. We get to preview a very, very treacherous schedule, but, a huge year and a huge schedule for Ohio State.
Yeah, when the weather cools like that, you're going from 80s, 90s. It's hot, it's humid, it's oppressive. The Canadian wildfire smoke was coming along. What was happening all throughout the month of July? And then all of a sudden, the weather's cooling a little bit. There's a little bit of a chill in the air. You can hear the crack of pads off in the distance because that football season's almost here. So, Grant, without further ado, let's roll right into this schedule for Ohio State. This is one of the tougher schedules in the country among any teams in college football. And this might be the toughest in school history for the Buckeyes. Grant, before we get into these games, we'll start with Ball State, but we've got to talk about Ohio State. Let's set the stage here for everybody. The Ohio State Buckeyes, 2026. Ryan Day, still the head coach coming into year 8. Julian Sayin is back under center for the Buckeyes at quarterback. Jeremiah Smith on the outside. Bo Jackson, Isaiah West at running back. 4 returning offensive linemen. We've got transfers at tight end. Lots of pieces on a very veteran offense for the Buckeyes. And then on defense, there's a lot to replace for Ohio State. They had 4 draft picks in the top 11 in this past draft, 25 total draft picks in the last 2 years. A lot to replace attrition-wise. However, talent is still abundant in Columbus. And Matt Patricia, year 2 of his defense. Grant, when you look at the Buckeyes, 2026, this roster, the way that it's constructed, what excites you the most about this team heading into the fall?
I think, like you said, to see what Matt Patricia can do with the guys he's brought in this year, we all know, what Styles and Reese and Downs and Styles, Lorenzo Styles, there's how deep that defense was with NFL talent. Now Ohio State has, they've brought in Earl Little Jr. and Terry Moore, and then guys like on the line, James Smith from Alabama, Quay Rousseau. So they brought in really talented guys and guys that are experienced for the most part. Who can step up and be the star on the defense this year? Who can Matt Patricia go to and unlock the talent of? Because the talent is there. These guys were at Alabama and Florida State and so on for a reason. And this defense, it has to be able to be a top 20, top 15 defense for Ohio State to be able to, survive the attrition of this schedule. So I'm excited to see what they can do on the defensive side there.
I mean, it was the number 1 unit in the country last year. It gave up just 9.3 yards per game, 219 yards per game. I mean, you look at this defense from Ohio State, it's been locked down the last 2 seasons, one of Jim Knowles, one of Matt Patricia, and he's here for year 2. Yes, there is some talent that was retained. There were some guys that could have gone to the draft that did not. Jermaine Matthews is back. Dominic Kelly brought in the transfer portal. A guy like Jay Timmons, a youngster, the freshman, he's been making a lot of noise. His name has continued to come up from spring ball. So I'm really excited to see what he looks like in fall camp. If he can start pushing guys for reps, like you said, Earl Little, you have these guys that they brought in the transfer portal, Christian Allegro at linebacker. That's one of the more fascinating ones to me because losing Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese, the production of those 2 linebackers alone, It's not something you can easily replace. And then Caleb Downs, again, not easily replaceable. Caden McDonald up the middle, not easily replaceable. So the word replace is not a word that really we should use on defense for Ohio State, but how does this defense still be as effective as they were without those key pieces? And they have guys to do it. Who's going to step up, like you're saying? And those are going to be the storylines we're watching throughout fall camp that we'll get into a little bit more on next week's show as we start turning the page really to fall camp after media days is over. But Grant, if I'm looking at the Buckeyes, I see Julian Sands back. Julian Sands was the most accurate passer in the country last year. And he set an FBS record, but Ohio State lost its last 2 games. Jeremiah Smith, outstanding freshman campaign, even better in year 2 now, year 3 of Jeremiah Smith. I mean, you can think about what he's going to be this year. It excites you. It puts a little bit of electricity in your blood. I get to go watch Jeremiah Smith play football today, knowing how special that's going to be. How long is it going to take him to break those records? Because records will be broken in Columbus this year by Jeremiah Smith, and the potential of this veteran offense for Ohio State. But the key to that offense is the offensive line. 4 starters are back. Have we seen the best of Ohio State's offensive line? That's the biggest question that I have for this Ohio State team, because I think talent-wise on offense at the skill positions at quarterback, I think they're fine. That is probably the best talent pool in college football on offense for Ohio State, but the offensive line matters. The Buckeyes were 12-0 last year, but now they get to the Big Ten championship game against Indiana, and they get beat because Julian Sands got sacked a bunch of times. Same thing happens against Miami. It was copy and paste of those games. And for Ohio State, if the offensive line doesn't take a step forward, then really have we seen the ceiling already of this Ohio State offense? Because how different is it from a year ago minus Carnell Tate? It's not really that different. So that to me is something I'm watching for the Buckeyes. And then Grant, Arthur Smith, he's coming as the offensive coordinator. This will be the last thing we say about Ohio State specifically before we hop into the schedule. The effect of Arthur Smith on this offense for Ohio State. They went from a veteran play caller in Chip Kelly in 2024 to Brian Hartline, a first-time play caller in 2025. And you could see some of that inexperience at times. But now you go back, you have another former NFL head coaching coordinator as your offensive coordinator on both sides of the ball. What's the effect of Arthur Smith going to be on this offense for the Buckeyes this year with all of these veteran pieces? And then now you think the run game is going to take a step forward this year, 1, because of scheme, but 2, because, again, a veteran offensive line and returning running backs.
Yeah, it's like I said, the offensive line, they had their woes. It's, you can go watch the tape of those 2 losses, and there's a lot to pick at there. But the silver lining is all but one of our regular contributors on that line are coming back. So it's year 2 with Tyler Bowen on top of that. He's had, a year and a half now to put his hands on, his offensive line and kind of instill his mentality. And, this full off season, they'll be able to do that with these guys that are veterans. You'd like to think that they do take that step forward, which is, like you said, it's going to be the determining factor in this, for this season, possibly, certainly for this offense, because if you aren't able to control the line of scrimmage in games like Texas and Oregon and Michigan and so on, you're not going to be a playoff team, with this schedule. So the offensive line is the key to being able to do that. And for this offense, regardless of if Julian Sands and Jeremiah Smith are on that side of the ball, the line has to be able to hold up their end of the bargain.
Yeah, I think the line is the ceiling for this team. And you look at it and say, yes, I know you have Jeremiah Smith. Yes, I know you have Julian Sands. They're both Heisman contenders. Mm-hmm. Can they really be enough to hide an underperforming offensive line? I don't know that they can, because you need time to throw the football. You need time for routes to develop. Now, Ohio State's learned its lesson, and if that's what they have, Ohio State's not going to let 12 more, 13 more, 14 more, 15 more games go by where it just looks like the Big Ten championship against Indiana or the Cotton Bowl against Miami. They're just not going to let that happen, so they'll figure it out. But have we seen the ceiling of this offensive line? That's the big storyline that we're going to watch in fall camp. But Grant, the Buckeyes, September 5th, they are back in the Horseshoe. They are playing Ball State. Jim Tressel will be honored before the game. He's now going to hang in the Ring of Honor inside Ohio Stadium as one of the legends of Ohio State. And that is going to probably be the biggest storyline of the game there. And that's no disrespect to Ball State. But that's going to be a welcomed and a well-deserved moment for Coach Tressel, all that he means to the state of Ohio, the community of Ohio State, his former players, former coaches. You see them all throughout the sport of college football and in real life and how involved that he is. But against Ball State, Coach Mike Yurevich, he is leading the Ball State. I think there's a quarterback battle going on. I don't foresee the Buckeyes having a lot of trouble with Ball State early on. But, guys, how we're going to work this each game, we're going to go ahead through a slight preview. We'll spend some more time on some games than others because some of them are bigger. But we're going to give you a pick, win or loss for Ohio State. And at the end, we will tell you the records. So, again, Grant, Ball State here, I don't think the Buckeyes are going to have a lot of trouble. I think we're going to see pretty vanilla offensively and defensively because this real big game is against Texas in week 2. But when we're looking at Ball State, I think this is a game where Ohio State is not going to have a lot of trouble. I think they go ahead and win at home.
Yeah, it's a definite win for Ohio State. A game where they're not going to be flashing a lot of tape, like you said, and just something where they're trying to get worked in. They're trying to get broken in. Especially on either side of the ball. See, where the chemistry is with guys the first time on a football field together. So I think it'll just kind of be working through things, and by the end, 40, 50-point victory, ideally, for Ohio State.
Yeah, their quarterback situation, it looks like it could be a battle right now. Keldrick Luster, Tyler Mizzle, those two guys are going to battle for that starting job. You see, there's a couple transfers that have come in, but they've not had a winning season in the last 14 years, aside from the shortened 2020.
Social media teams have been good, though. They've been funny. Both states,
There's been lots of content. They're excited to come to Columbus and the Buckeyes.
Yes, welcome.
Yeah. It is. But Grant, let's roll right into Texas. Okay. Cam Coleman, he transfers in as a wide receiver. You've got Colin Simmons. No name bigger, though, than Arch Manning. Steve Sarkisian, I think the hot seat, man. It's getting warm if he can't have this team win big games. Going to Austin. Okay, this is a rematch of the home and home series that had the front end in Columbus last year to open the season. It was a 1 versus 3 matchup because the AP poll decided they didn't want to make the Buckeyes 2 because of Penn State. We saw how that went. So preseason polls don't mean anything, as we've learned.
Yeah.
But the Buckeyes get to go to Austin, and Steve Sarkisian and Texas. This is a gotta-have-it game for them, I think. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to win the game, but you look at the last 2 times Ohio State's played Texas, and the Buckeyes have won that game, and they've been in control for the most part. They controlled Texas last year early. But this is probably the most talented supporting cast that Arch Manning has had. It's probably Steve Sarkisian's best team. Colin Simmons and that defensive line. What is the blueprint to beat Ohio State, Grant? We look at how Ohio State's lost in its last 5 or 6 matchups, and you're seeing special teams with field goal kicking, and you're looking at offensive line issues with giving up sacks or not being able to run the football because of a weaker offensive line. So can Ohio State have that fixed by the time they get to week 2 in Austin under the lights at DKR? That's the big storyline in this game for Ohio State. But Grant, Arch Manning, is he ready to take that next step? Do you think that he is going to be the version of that quarterback that we were promised out of high school, that people think he's going to be, this Heisman winner type quarterback? Do you think that's the Arch Manning we see in this game? Because last year he was very underwhelming. He didn't do a lot. He was contained. Ohio State had him pretty much in hell for most of that game. What do you expect of Arch Manning against the Buckeyes? Because this is early. There's not a lot of football that's going to be played. You have spring ball, you have fall camp, and you have week 1. That's all that's between the end of last season and this game for Arch Manning.
Yeah, I think, whether or not he becomes that version that people expected, it's hard to say because those expectations were pretty monumental, whether he wanted them or not. But, I do think he takes that step forward. And he did finish the year, ascending, to be fair, to Arch and Sark. But, coming into this year, I'm sure Sark, this offseason has had a come to Jesus moment with Arch, because there were a lot of, tucking the ball when he could have been throwing it. airmailing passes that he would make in practice, probably routinely. Changing the arm slot when he didn't have to, and the ball just going awry. So I would imagine that he's going to be a little more polished this year, and he's going to take a next step to be able to operate that Texas offense at a higher level. And like you said, Cam Coleman coming in, be a nice boost, a lot more talent on that, surrounding arch, like you said, to be able to, facilitate too. So I think, it would lend itself to him taking that next step this season, whether or not it is, top 1 or 2 in the Heisman. I don't know. It's you just haven't seen that for more than a half, maybe, with Arch Manning. So that's where I'd stand with him.
I mean, even last season, Arch against Ohio State was not good. But as the season went on, you said the trajectory started going up for him. You saw him improving week to week as the college football season wore on. But can he continue that? And that's the big question for him is, can they continue? Can they sustain that level of play? Because that's what they need for him in order to go ahead and compete for an SEC championship, to compete for a national championship. But before all that can happen, they've got a game against Ohio State at home in week 2. And it doesn't count against the SEC rankings. But you saw Steve Sarkisian in media day saying, well, okay, if we did not play Ohio State last year, we're 10-2 and we're in the playoff. Well, sure, Steve. Absolutely, that's true. And we give you credit for going and playing that game in Columbus and then hosting the Buckeyes the following year. That's what college football is about. Those are the games that should happen. And you know what? Florida was the reason that you didn't get into the college football.
4-8 Florida.
It wasn't because, yes, Ohio State gave you a loss. But, I mean, come on. If you handle your business against Florida like you should have, which was a sub-500 football team, then – you're in the college football playoff, even with the loss to Ohio State, because you're still 10-2. And again, Ohio State this year, really difficult schedule. Would it behoove them not to play Texas because they could lose? Absolutely. But you have a 12-team playoff. You are the University of Texas. You are the Ohio State Buckeyes. Schedule these games. These are good for college football. This is what this is about. You have an expanded playoff. Take care of your business where you should. Go play the big boys. You play in the 2 best conferences in the sport. You get to see the Big Ten and the SEC head to head. That is what college football is about. That's what this expansion era is all about, seeing the top programs, the top conferences going against each other and saying, okay, mano y mano, this is our best versus your best. Or this is one of our best teams versus one of your best teams. It gives you those evaluator points. And for Texas, they have not been successful in those kinds of games. But this is another opportunity. It's a blank slate this year. It's wiped completely clean. Ryan Wingo, again, at wide receiver for Texas, alongside Cam Coleman. That is probably one of the better duos in all of college football. And Arch gets to throw to him. And if we saw the Arch Manning at the end of the season last year, Ohio State's defense will have its hands full. How do you defend that? But on the flip side, Grant, we're talking about Ohio State's offensive line. Let's look at Ohio State's defensive line. The last 2 matchups against Texas, they've had 3 goal line stands. Can the Buckeyes duplicate that? Texas has not been good in short yardage.
No.
So can Texas get those woes out of their system? There's things on each side here for each program to work out, and that's part of the chess match of this matchup specifically. But that's going to be a charged up atmosphere, and that's what bodes well for Ohio State, because you saw last year with Arch Manning as the young quarterback. Yes, so was Julian Sand, but Julian Sand had the home crowd behind him. He had the conservative game plan behind him. Now, they could have opened it up if they had to. Ryan Day said they didn't need to because they trusted the defense and they thought they could do enough offensively, and they did. That's not going to be the approach from Ohio State this year. It can't be. All of your guys are veteran on offense. And Arch Manning, now you get the home crowd behind you. You get the revenge factor 2 years in a row. You are 0-2 against the Buckeyes. You have the home crowd now behind you. You have the night atmosphere. You have a fierce defensive line led by Colin Simmons. Can they get to say it? Can they affect him? Can Ohio State run the football? Those are the factors that are going to play into this game for the Buckeyes and for the Longhorns. And so, Grant, what specifically to you are you watching when you're looking at how these 2 teams stack up, the lore that's been between them over the last couple of seasons? What are you most interested in right now that you think is going to affect this game the most come the second week of September?
Well, I think, like we've talked about, the development of Arch and that offense as a whole, because 7 points in Columbus last year and not being able to convert so many chances to do so. I think that'll be a huge difference, especially at home. In that environment, and Ohio State's defense that early in the season this year, being less experienced and having less chemistry than last year, I think that's going to be something also that the Texas's offense and Sark can take advantage of. So I think that chess match is going to be one to follow, because I think Ohio State's offense more or less should be okay and should be able to pick up where they left off and take that next step.
Yeah, again, it's the same thing. Playmakers, Ohio State's fine, but again, it's the trenches. That's going to be the focal point. You have to execute in the trenches. You have to be able to convert in short yardage. You have to be able to run the football. You have to be able to protect the quarterback. Those three things are the keys in the trenches right there for both teams. Grant, Texas has scored 21 combined points in the last two matchups. Ohio State has scored 42. Now, looking at this matchup in DKR, a night atmosphere in Austin, Texas, Ohio State or Texas, who is your pick in this game?
Early in the year, with a younger, less experienced defense for Ohio State, I'm going to give the edge to Texas and have Ohio State being 1-1 at that point.
Yeah, I'm looking at this matchup as well. I see a great matchup here. I see two good teams.
Very close, yeah.
It is. But again, what is Ohio State's offensive line going to be? I think, again, Texas is going to be in a gotta-have-it spot here. So before fall camp, we have not seen either team in fall camp yet. So at this point, before actually seeing these teams in person in the fall, I'm leaning Texas here as well. So I'm going to put the Buckeyes at 1-1 to start the year. But again, I think this is very close. I could be convinced to switch this pick to Ohio State, and it wouldn't take a lot. But I think right now, knowing what I saw at the end of last season for the Buckeyes and what they bring back, again, replacing on defense, I want to see what it looks like in fall camp. We're going to have a better idea about this in August, and then we'll see some on-field product in September before we officially pick this game in September, the week before. So Ohio State 1-1, according to both Grant and me here through 2 weeks. Let's move on to game 3. We've got Kent State coming to the Horseshoe on September 19th. Grant, when you see Kent State is coming to town, this is a get-back game for Ohio State. It's a get-right game. You go ahead. You're going to get back on track here. I think Ohio State wins this game pretty easily, lets off some steam regardless. I think the offense is going to, again, start to get going. You're going to try more things on defense. So I've got the Buckeyes winning again at home against Kent State.
Yeah, I think it's, like you said, it's coming off an emotional game no matter what happens against Texas. They're going to be laying off a lot of steam. It may be a slow first quarter where people are freaking out. It's like 7-3 or something. And then, Ohio State realizes they're Ohio State and they let off a lot of their frustration and then works out some of their kinks and, works towards the Big Ten schedule, which will be coming up.
This is the second MAC team Ohio State will have played in 3 weeks here to open the season. Kent State has not been a very good program over the last couple of seasons. So, again, you're going to see a lot of depth play in this game for Ohio State. I'm sure you'll see the starters probably play the first half. Once we get into the second half, I do think that we will see Tavian St. Clair in at quarterback. You'll see some of the depth guys at wide receiver, probably some Chris Henry, some Brock Boyd for you in this one in the second half. So, yes, the scoreboard might be a little bit ugly, but if you're a fan, stay. Check out the second half. You're going to see some depth on this team for the Buckeyes in the Horseshoe. So Ohio State improves to 2-1, according to both Grant and me here through 3 weeks. Grant, after that, Illinois is coming to the Horseshoe. Now, this game in particular right here, we have seen Ohio State reveal blackout uniforms. We know Ohio State has the Scarlet Rush uniforms, the Sub-Zero uniforms. When I look at this game against Illinois, I think this could be where the blackout happens. You look down the schedule, you look at what other teams are playing across the country, what network could have this game. I think that this is going to be the NBC night kickoff, 7:30 from the shoe in a blackout atmosphere. That is not based on sourced intel. That is just my gut feel looking at the schedule. If Ohio State does do the blackout game this year, that is where I think that we would see that. So Illinois coming to town, Ohio State in a blackout atmosphere, according to me here. Luke Altmaier, they've got to replace him. Illinois is having to do some roster management. Now, Brett Bielema has done a great job here, but replacing Luke Altmaier is not going to be an easy thing to do. But they went into the transfer portal from East Carolina to get Katin Hauser. He threw for over 5,300 yards last season. So again, over the last 2 seasons. So Illinois is not, Illinois is not going to be afraid. Sorry, we're looking at stats and info down here on my notes. They're not going to be afraid to throw the football, but can they throw the football on Ohio State? Again, we're going to see Big Ten football from these guys. You've got the running backs, Caden Fegan. You've got Aiden Lowry. They're all coming back. The receiver room retains its number 2 and number 3 options here. So this is not a totally new team, but again, you're replacing a quarterback. This is a big-time atmosphere. I don't know that Illinois is going to give Ohio State a ton of trouble, but I think there will be times in this game where you see them make them uncomfortable a little bit. I think that's the style of football game that we're looking for. Where are you at with the Buckeyes and the Illini?
Yeah, I think you're right. It's you have to give Brett Bielema credit for always finding a way to elevate like middling programs. So I don't think Illinois is going to come in and just flop. I also don't think Juice Williams is going to come and take over the game out of nowhere either. But like you said, they bring in Katin Hauser, who lit it up at ECU, but had a little bit of an interception problem. He had 17 picks in 2 years playing in the AAC, so that's something to watch. Illinois also finished last year 98th in the run game and yards per carry, and 110th in pass protection. Altmaier was under duress. So if Ohio State is to be Ohio State, especially in the trenches on the defensive line, unless Illinois somehow shored that up within one offseason, I would expect Ohio State to give Hauser some trouble, to get that pressure, force some picks out of him. And then by the end of the game, you see Ohio State winning by, 17-21. Ideally, if following that game plan. But Illinois with Brett Bielema, I don't think it's a team that you just like Kent State or Ball State, but it's a team that Ohio State should be able to outlast pretty easily.
And that's the thing; they do have some continuity on offense, but again, how is that going to translate against the Buckeyes on the road when you're overmatched? What can you provide offensively to give Ohio State some fits? Because Ohio State's defense is good enough to keep them in the game if the offense stays quiet. But you have to look defensively. I think, granted, this game, defense is going to be the key for Illinois here because of how veteran and how talented Ohio State's offense is. If there's a way to get the Buckeyes this year, it's to score some points on them. But the Buckeyes are definitely going to be able to match whichever team that they're playing in terms of production. But you see what Brett Bielema did. He hired longtime Montana coach Bobby Hauck to install an aggressive new 3-3-5 defense. So it's going to be a different look for the Illini defensively this year. We're going to see what that looks like early in the season. So we'll have more details on that once we see that on-field product. That's just a note. There's a scheme change here for Illinois and Brett Bielema on that defensive side of the ball. Now, we see a lot of players on this defense that could have gone to the draft that decided to turn it down and to come back and to stay in Champaign. So there's going to be some veteran names on this defense still. Like you're seeing Matthew Bailey, Xavier Scott, Juice Clark. They're all back for Illinois on the defensive side of the ball. So again, they're breaking a new piece of quarterback on both lines of scrimmage, and they have a new defensive scheme. So fresh faces on the offensive line, fresh faces on the defensive line, fresh face at quarterback, new defensive scheme. Opponents, Ohio State. I'm going to take the Buckeyes by 3 scores in this game. So I think Ohio State improves to 3-1. Grant, where are you?
I'm right there with you. I think it's 17, 20, 21, something like that for Ohio State by the end of the game. It's just going to be too much for Illinois. But by the end of the year, you never know where Brett Bielema's squad is going to be. But so just watch for that.
All right, let's move on. Ohio State 3-1. Game 5, October 3rd at Iowa. This game has not been kind to the Buckeyes when they have to travel to Kinnick in the last couple of tries. Now, Grant, this game, we see Iowa has its 10th straight 8-win season. Now, again, some of these stats are excluding the pandemic year because the Big Ten decided they don't want to play football early on in the fall. But that's a story for another day. Kirk Ferentz still the head coach. He has been there for a long time. It is an institution over there in Iowa. Grant, this game has given Ohio State fits, but is this the Iowa team that has given Ohio State fits in the past? Do you think their matchup warrants saying, hey, this could be a trap game? Yes, playing at Kinnick is never easy. Or do you think Ohio State's the supremely talented team and it would be more of a shock if there was an update? Like, where do you think this game falls on that spectrum of, okay, hey, Ohio State's on upset alert because Iowa's a good team and Iowa can beat them, versus Ohio State's the way better team, and if Iowa wins this game, I would be shocked? Where does this game fall for you on that meter? Because when you see Iowa on Ohio State's football schedule in Kinnick, it raises some red flags for Ohio State fans. Like, okay, all right, we need to be careful if you're Ohio State going into that game. Where does this fall on that spectrum?
I think the gap has grown considerably, truly, between Ohio State and Iowa. That isn't to say that Kinnick isn't, a phenomenal atmosphere, and it isn't to say that Ohio State could have trouble early because of that, because it's a completely different place, especially if it's at night, black sky, black crowd, that close to the field. Some of the new guys for Ohio State, playing in an environment just a little different. In Iowa City, it's just a different kind of place, But at the end of the day, let's throw some numbers at you with Iowa's offense. 119th in total offense last year, 129th in passing offense, 102nd in yards per play overall on offense. They dealt with some injury problems at quarterback last year. But even with that, Iowa has a very long way to go before they can, compete 4 quarters with a team like Ohio State, and let alone pull off a win, even if it is at night in an environment like that. They're just, they're going to have to find resources, whatever it is. Iowa just doesn't seem like they're going to, that environment will be able to close the gap for them right now.
Now, Grant, you're saying it could be a night game. You're saying it could be a blackout crowd. Could this be 2 blackout games in a row for Ohio State, back-to-back blackouts for the Buckeyes? Could this be? I don't know if a team's ever had to endure that before, one on the home side, one on the road side. But if that's how it falls, we'll find out what that's like for Ohio State. Again, just semantics there. But Mark Gronowski, he is back at quarterback. He can move. But again, Iowa doesn't scare you when they throw the football. Can Iowa find a reason to make you respect the passing game down the field this year? We will find out. Recent history says no. But again, it's a blank slate. Like we said, things can happen. You could develop. That's going to be the thing for Iowa. Is it going to be around and pound? Is it going to want to be defense? That's historically how this game has been. But Grant, you were sharing the numbers. It's hard to argue with empirical data. Iowa offensively, it doesn't stand out to you. They need this game to be ugly. They do. It's just what happens. It has to be ugly. They've got to force turnovers. That's going to be the recipe here for Iowa to go ahead and pull the upset. And on the flip side, if you're Ohio State, protect Julian saying, run the football. Don't turn the ball over. It's the same thing. Get the ball to Jeremiah Smith. Utilize your strong running backs. Do we see Legend Bay worked into this game as a Swiss Army knife piece? Lots of options for the Buckeyes there. So make Iowa defend the entire field, sideline to sideline, and I think the Buckeyes will be fine if they can do that again, because now this is going to be your 5th game of the season. The defense should start to find its footing. This is where you're going to start to see, I think, Ohio State's defense really starting to take shape, where you're like, okay, we now have a feel for what the Buckeyes look like schematically. You're going to start seeing some guys who have stepped up, guys, all right, maybe it's not your time to play here. You'll see. There's a full month of data at this point in time for the Buckeyes. So that's where you're going to start to see this take place defensively for Ohio State. But again, Kamari Moulton at running back, he is back. And then at wide receiver, they added 2 FCS All-Americans. Do we think that's going to impact the passing game? On paper, it says it should. So again, historically, Iowa has not been outstanding through the air. But they have a running back that they trust back. They have a quarterback returning. And they have pulled All-American wide receivers from the lower level to Ohio State. Big talent difference. But on paper, maybe Iowa's offense is something that you're going to have to look at this season, but we will find out. Grant, who is your pick in this game between the Buckeyes and the Hawkeyes?
I think it's Ohio State. Like you said, it's, you protect the ball, you run the ball, you go off play action. You don't try to put the ball into harm's way because you don't have to. Because even if Iowa improves dramatically on offense, it's still not going to be good enough to beat an Ohio State team if they do what they're supposed to. So I'll take Ohio State.
I'm going to take Ohio State as well. So that puts the Buckeyes at 4-1 through 5 games, according to both of us. Again, we promise that there will be a difference in record at the end of the show. Just stay tuned for it. Game 6, Maryland. Mike Locksley. This game is at home for Ohio State. We know the lore that has come between Maryland and Ohio State since the Chase Young saga. But Maryland here, they've got a lot of continuity coming back. They have retained a lot of that roster. They did not use the transfer portal hard. But granted, they were 4-8 last season. It was very disappointing. It was a rough 4-8 finish because they had a 4-0 non-conference start, and then it just wheels fell off. Malik Washington had a ton of yards for them last year, but again, they just couldn't figure out the offense or the defense as the season wore on. But Malik Washington is back. Again, they're retaining a lot. When you're looking at Ohio State and Maryland, how these two teams stack up. Now, this game has not really been close since that scare in 2018. Yes, Maryland has given Ohio State fits, but you've not really had your heart in your mouth like you did in that 2018 game for this. So Ohio State should be in control of this game when we're looking at what the teams were last year, what they're bringing back, and just the talent levels. But when you look at Maryland, what's standing out to you about the Terrapins, either offensively, defensively? What do you think this year means to Mike Locksley? Like, what are the storylines surrounding the Terrapins this year?
Well, Locksley, he's up there with, Sarkisian and, maybe Kalen DeBoer starting to get that hot seat. A lot of those coaches where, it's prove it or lose it. And he's right up there on that list for me. And I know a lot of people. So first off, I know that Maryland's going to be playing, he's going to be playing for his job, coaching for his job. And that team, especially Malik Washington, he's flashing, showing a lot of pro potential, especially with his, his body and his arm. He's got that NFL look. So I think if Maryland can utilize, his build, his talent, and build the offense around him in a way that gives Maryland a chance to be an 8-win team or something like, something like that. That's what's going to be the difference for Maryland's program and for Locksley at the end of the day. As far as Ohio State, it's a different story. I think that gap, it's kind of like Iowa. I think the gap is grown more between these two teams over the years.
Well, great. You see this. And when you're looking at a program like Maryland, again, struggling last season, they've been middle to middle low in the Big Ten. What game or what games can they win to go middle up? Like to be that we're average, but we're average to above average. We're not quite in that top tier. We're not quite in that second tier. We're sitting in one of the middle tiers. How do we get out of the middle tiers? That's the thought for Maryland. Okay, what teams on our schedule can we beat, like you're saying, to get to 8 wins? Now, Ohio State is not going to be a team that you target and say, hey, we're going to go all in on beating the Buckeyes. Yeah. Now, yes, you want to pull the upset and you go into every game with a competition that says, hey, we can win this game. You always want to think that you can win the game as a competitor, which they do. But if you look at the schedule realistically, this is not a game where Maryland's like, okay, we can definitely beat Ohio State and you can bake in that win. No, this will be an upset if you're Maryland. But you've got to see, okay, what are the swing games for the Terrapins? What are the loss games? What are the win games? And then can you pull an upset? I don't know that Maryland has enough to pull the upset, but I do think that if they find the right pieces, if they do hit on some of those guys they brought in at wide receiver, because that room looks completely different for them this season, if those guys hit paired with Malik Washington, I do think those swing games that could go either way against those middle teams, that can maybe push them above 500. That can maybe push them to 7 wins, potentially 8. That might be a little bit of a stretch. So I think, again, if you're Maryland, that's kind of where you're at as a program right now. So I don't see, again, Ohio State having issues with Maryland. I think the Buckeyes take care of business against the Terrapins. Grant, it feels like that you agree.
Yeah, for sure. The gap is just too big between these two teams. And, Malik Washington can be a very special talent. I do believe that, but I don't think it's going to be enough to pull off an upset.
All right, 5-1 for Ohio State through 6 games. Could this be the spot where Grant or me disagrees? Indiana. This is one that is circled on the calendar in Bloomington and Columbus, a rematch of the Big Ten championship game from a year ago. Indiana, the defending national champions, Curt Cignetti and Bloomington are the talk of the sport. It was the historically worst program in college football all the way to the top program in college football. Indiana had one of the best stories from a year ago, Fernando Mendoza. He's now off to the NFL. Josh Hoover now takes over at quarterback for the Hoosiers. Grant, this is a big one. This is the biggest home game that Bloomington, Indiana has ever had in its history. They're replacing some lost talent, but so are the Buckeyes. This one is going to be the evaluator for Indiana of how good are they? Can they do it again? Can they sustain what they did a year ago? That doesn't mean 15-0. That doesn't mean 16-0. What that means for Indiana is, can you still compete at the highest level? If Ohio State comes into your building and they win by 3 scores and you say, okay, last year they won the national title. It was cute a year ago. Okay, they were just a year away. They were building towards it. And then, boom, the wheels fall off and you look like flash in the pan. This is Indiana's chance. They don't have to win the game. They just got to be competitive. And they have the pieces to be competitive. They have the pieces to win the game. Indiana could be a real team again this season, but this is that benchmark that says, okay, Ohio State's been the class of the conference. Can you beat them again? Can you beat them at home? This is a massive game for Big Ten implications, for college football playoff implications, and for both programs. Ohio State, you're going to lose to Indiana back-to-back times after winning almost 30 straight. This is the state of college football now. It's a lot is settling on this game. And Josh Hoover, what's he going to look like in this Indiana offense? Curt Cignetti, how's he going to motivate a program that just accomplished what they said they were going to accomplish? They did it. They checked the box. And now you're going to go back and do it again. And they can. And Curt Cignetti is a great coach. But what's it going to look like? This is that first moment where we see what it's going to look like for the Hoosiers, Grant. What do you see when you look at the 2026 Indiana football team?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people expect them to be a really good team again. It's, Pick Six preview has them top 10 again, preseason. So I don't think a lot of experts expect Indiana to just go away after, what we just witnessed last year. Certainly not with Cignetti at the helm. Josh Hoover comes in from TCU. He is the active leader in yards, 9,627 yards, and in touchdowns with 71 TDs. So they lose Mendoza. They bring in an insanely experienced and talented very experienced quarterback that Cignetti, loves that type of quarterback. This guy that's been through it all. He's been in all kinds of situations. He can coach them through any kind of game plan. I think he's got that recipe again with Hoover. And then, they added Tulane's number 1 wide receiver with Shaz Preston, as well as Nick Marsh from Michigan State, another really good wide receiver. And they're going to bring back Charlie Becker. We all remember what he could do with, one-on-one jump balls last year. So, just on the offensive side alone, and they brought in a guy from Boston College who's going to supplement their third stringer from last year at running back. So, you can kind of see their blueprint from last year kind of coming to fruition again. Like you said, is it going to be an undefeated national championship season? I don't know. That was incredible. That was insane. Mendoza was a special athlete and special human being. Who knows if that can be replicated again? But this is going to be a really good team. Indiana is probably going to be a top 10 team again. They're going to be in the playoff mix again. Whether or not they beat Ohio State, I've been back and forth on this for a while. The optics of Ohio State losing back-to-back matchups against Indiana it's pretty surreal. But you can't look at last year and look at what they've done this offseason and discount the possibility. So, this is a tough one. It's going to be an incredible game.
Yeah, and Grant, you said it, the optics of Ohio State losing twice, but you don't make picks off of optics. It's like this is a reality that this new world of college football has created. Ohio State could, after just winning 30 straight games against one program, lose 2 in a row to Indiana. And if you told yourself that 10 years ago, if you said, hey, guess what? 2016 self, Indiana's going to beat Ohio State 2 years in a row and they're going to win a national championship while doing it, you'd be like, what did you have for dinner?
Yeah. Which edition of EA College Football was that on? Yeah.
Right, exactly. So are you playing Dynasty mode or where are we?
It's a road to glory.
Exactly. Like those are the things that you'd think. But this new world of college football has given these opportunities for these programs to do it. And Curt Cignetti has the blueprint. That's the standard of how you do a rebuild, is what Curt Cignetti just did in Bloomington. And you have to respect him for it. You have to tip your cap for it. It was outstanding to watch. Just a storyline as a college football fan, what Indiana was able to do last year was special. That run was special. But now you got to come back and do it again. You got to come back to reality. Is there going to be a national championship hangover? Now you're playing this game in mid-October, so that shouldn't really last by then. But Grant, Ohio State is bringing back 4 offensive linemen. Guess what? So is Indiana. And they were mauling teams in the college football playoff last year, and they handled Ohio State pretty well in the Big Ten title game. This is a rematch. Like we said, it was 13-10, not a lot of offense, but points were definitely left on the field for both teams. Which offensive line is going to have its way in this game? Which defensive line is going to have its way in this game? Because if you are Ohio State and you look across the field, you lost the line of scrimmage in both places in the Big Ten championship game. So when I see both teams returning 4 offensive linemen, I'm like, you know what? That right there is the matchup that I'm going to watch. Sure, Julian saying Josh Hoover, I get it. Charlie Becker, Jeremiah Smith. Okay, we're not going to compare those two because Jeremiah Smith is the better player. But the offensive line and the defensive line, that to me is the matchup that we've got to watch. And then you're returning your tackle duo of Tyreek Tucker and Mario Landino on that defensive line. Can Ohio State run the football inside? This is the matchup to watch. It's in the trenches again. Any big game for Ohio State, the trenches will be the indicator. You don't want to have fool's gold where you're watching and saying, okay, they're beating these teams. Ohio State was 12-0 last year, but they couldn't hold their own at the line of scrimmage when it mattered most. That is how Ohio State gets back to winning the Big Ten or winning a national championship this season, or both. They've got to win the battle in the trenches. So, Grant, when you see this game, biggest home game in Indiana football history, Ohio State's coming to town. Potentially an undefeated showdown, potentially a top 5 matchup. We both have Ohio State with a loss already. What do you see in this matchup between the Buckeyes and the Hoosiers?
I think the difference, like you said, in the trenches, specifically Ohio State's offensive line, I have got to think that Ryan Day and Arthur Smith and that whole line, honestly, have gone through that game, countless times and looked at what Indiana did to them, because Indiana aided Miami in beating Ohio State by showing that tape. There is, there were, the cat was out of the bag by the time they played Miami because of the way that Cignetti was able to expose them. I would like to think that an entire offseason of that and preparation for that gives Ohio State the edge to be able to pull out the win in Bloomington. Obviously, this is predicated on the improvement of the offensive line, but I think the experience coming back and Bowen having more time with the line and Arthur Smith and so on and so forth, I think Ohio State gains that edge back and gets back in the win column against Indiana. But it's going to be razor thin, I think.
Yeah, tight game here in Bloomington on Grant's pick. And Grant, I'm with you on this. I do think that Ohio State right now is my pick to win this game in Bloomington. So I think Ohio State, again, improves here to 6-1. I think that they're going to find a way to beat the Hoosiers. I think Julian Sayin is going to have a bounce-back game. And this game's going to mean a lot, especially to the offensive line.
Yes.
Those guys are returning. They take pride in that position. They take pride in being a Buckeye, and they know that they got bullied. I get it. Texas is a huge game. I get it. Oregon is a big game. This is not in the same class as the Michigan game. I won't even pretend. But when you see those three big games, this offensive line circled that Indiana game because of what happened and how it happened. They want that chance. And I think that's the game where I expect Ohio State's offensive line to be at its best, and it needs to be at its best to beat Indiana, and I think that they do. So I will take Ohio State to win that game as well. So, Grant, now we have reached this place where Ohio State has played 7 games. We both have them at 6-1. There is another loss coming for one of us. Where we will find that, you will find out right after this quick break, where we go ahead and share an event with you guys that we're going to be doing here at the end of August. This is called Tailgate Takeover with Dick's House of Sport in Polaris, Ohio. You guys are invited. Screenshot this QR code. If you have another phone with you and you're watching on TV, go ahead and scan this. If you are listening on podcast, this registration link will be in the show description. Join us on Saturday, August 29th for Tailgate Takeover at Dick's House of Sport in Polaris from 12 to 3 p.m. We will have a live show from this Tailgate Takeover event. There is going to be a ton of fun at this event. This is a parking lot tailgate party. There's going to be games, tailgate favorites, lots of experiences in the store for you to have fun. There's going to be plenty of gear on sale. This is going to be a family event because it is the week before football season. So we're going to kick off football season a week early. This takes place during week 0. And then Ohio State will play Ball State the following week. But Dick's House of Sport in Polaris, Ohio, TSB Live returns. We will have a massive show planned for you where we're going to look through the 2026 season. We're going to have some special guests. It's going to be a ton of fun. It's going to be a family event right there at Dick's House of Sport in Polaris. So we cannot wait to see you there. Make sure that you register at this link. But Grant, now we're going to go to Ohio State's 8th game of the season here. This is against USC. This is on the road, back-to-back road games for the Buckeyes. Now going to Los Angeles to the Coliseum to take on the Trojans, which are a really trendy pick. They're a trendy pick to get to the college football playoff. They're a trendy pick to make noise in the Big Ten. And I have seen some people talking about, hey, this is a trendy pick to go ahead and clip the Buckeyes. Now, Jeremiah is back. Lincoln Riley. Grant, why has he caught heat during his tenure at USC? Because the defense hasn't been great. That defense, though, the problems are supposedly gone away. So when USC hosts the Buckeyes, second leg of a back-to-back road trip for the Buckeyes, potentially coming off of what we both have as a win against Indiana, so an emotional road win for the Buckeyes. Grant, how does this game shake up for Ohio State when you see this? Yes, there was an open date between Indiana and USC, but again, you're traveling all the way out west, coming off of Indiana, Oregon's waiting next week. The dynamic spot in this game is not ideal for Ohio State.
Yeah, it's I think it is. You have Indiana, USC, and Oregon. That is the murderer's row. That's when everyone looks at Ohio State's schedule, that's when they say, "Oh, this might be the hardest schedule in the country." The bye week it is helpful. I think obviously if they didn't have the bye week, if they were going to Indiana and to Los Angeles in back-to-back weeks, that would just be hellish for college kids to go through. So the bye week will be very helpful. But at the end of the day, it's 3 straight games against 3 very good opponents and a road game all the way across the country against a supposedly improved USC team. They're going to have their hands full. It's going to be another game where Ohio State's going to be in a 4-quarter battle, and they're probably going to have to find a way to pull away in the 4th quarter. The defensive issues for USC, they were there last year. I think people were starting to get really tired of Lincoln Riley's defensive issues. Specifically USC fans and so on and so forth. But they were 91st in giving up explosive rushes. They were 115th in the country in QB completion percentage, and 82nd in yards per carry. So they were just making it entirely too easy for teams to move the ball on them. So even if they did have a good offense, even if Jaden Mavia was a Heisman candidate, they were giving up too many points, and they didn't have the ball enough to be able to control the game. So like you said, it's supposed to be shored up this year. They went out and They have 3 returning defensive linemen. They got Penn State starter and Zariah Fisher. They signed the number 1 DN in the country, Luke Wafel. I don't know, not totally sure how to pronounce that. But with the experience coming back and some of the additions they've added, obviously they're looking to improve upon that defense to a point where their offense can start to shine and make a difference into the game. Because Jaden Mavia, if he takes another step, that dude is a top 3 Heisman candidate in a heartbeat. The only thing he has to shore up is the picks, because he had 10 last year. And if you're playing Ohio State and you're giving them the ball, they're going to walk out of there with a win any day of the week. So, it's not a terrible pick. I'm not saying people are crazy for picking USC. If they do improve on defense with Mavia coming back, Lincoln Riley having his hands on an offense and a quarterback like that, this is a really good team. And in the Coliseum, anything can happen. So, not one of those games, especially after playing Indiana, where you can be too confident in Ohio State winning easily.
It's true. And when I see this USC team, I look at a team last year that lost a lot of running back depth because of injuries. They ended up relying on a walk-on to close the season. Jade Mayava is one of the most talented quarterbacks in the country. But again, who's he going to throw to? Because Mekhi Lemon, the Blitnikoff Award winner, is off to the NFL playing for the Eagles, where they brought in Tanook Hines and Terrell Anderson. That's going to lead to a retooled wide receiver room for USC. But that doesn't mean they're not going to be able to distribute the football. It's just going to look different. And if you're going to have to trust an offensive unit or a defensive unit on a Lincoln Riley coach team, Grant, by unanimous show of hands, we're going to trust the offensive unit when you look at USC. So I do think that USC's offense is going to be fine, and I think they're going to find a way to become dangerous. But what's going to make USC different than years ago is the addition of Gary Patterson as your defensive coordinator now. He was at TCU for a long time. And this is going to be the best defensive coordinator that Lincoln Riley's had in a while. Now, there's a match zone scheme that is going to be around a defensive line that returns most of its starters. But since we've made trenches such a big talking point on this show, Grant, USC returns all 5 offensive linemen. That's a big stat, okay? For USC to take this step forward, they return a lot in the trenches, and that's been a place they have been bullied in previous years. So I like USC to be a better team. I like them to be an improved team. I don't think they have enough to beat Ohio State, but I do think this game is going to be one that is one of those type of games for Ohio State. They escape the Coliseum with a win, and I think that is exactly what it's going to be. I think it's going to be an escape of the Coliseum here on Halloween.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an uglier win for Ohio State. That point in the season after an emotional win, even if it is after a bye week, you're heading way out west to play a team that is waiting for you, chomping at the bit to play you. I think Ohio State has the edge, and after 4 quarters, they win the game, but it's not going to be an easy one.
All right, so we're about taking Ohio State to win, which means the Buckeyes still have just 1 loss. Now, Grant, you were talking about this in the previous segment where this 3-game stretch is the biggest and toughest on Ohio State's schedule, and the final leg of it is Oregon at home. You have just gone to Indiana. You had a week off. You go across the country now to USC in Los Angeles to play in the Coliseum. Now you return back home. Oregon's coming across the country with you. You host the Ducks. Not won the last 2 regular season matchups. When you see this game, Dante Moore is quarterback for Oregon, arguably the top quarterback in the country. Oregon's defensive line could be the best overall D-line unit in college football. That is going to be a key. Then you're going to see guys like Evan Stewart back on this team. There is a lot of talent for the Ducks. This is the year that they were building toward to win a national championship. Dan Lanning has done a good job, but Dan Lanning has not been able to win the biggest games on the biggest stages where it counts, and that's been later into the postseason. They have beaten Ohio State in the regular season. They lost to Indiana in the regular season last year. Grant, looking at the Ducks, what stands out to you the most? Because when I see this team, I'm like, okay, very talented quarterback, very talented in the trenches, very talented out wide. There's not a lot of holes on this team, and they have a good coaching staff. So when you see the Ducks, what stands out to you?
Well, it's, like you said, between the names and the numbers, this is probably the most balanced team in the country. Just from what we know right now, there's really not a lot of holes anywhere on Oregon. On defense, they were middle of the road, on third down situations, and they didn't force a lot of negative plays. But other than that, you look at every kind of metric. This team has potential and talent all over the board. And Dan Lanning, it is what it is. He's a master motivator. And before this game, maybe he'll get some clickbait of his own, motivating the squad. But, Oregon coming into Ohio State, knowing their past with big games, and knowing that the last Oregon team to come into Columbus won in Columbus, they're going to have a chip on their shoulder. So Dante Moore, I think that's what's, the guy that is that experience, and he's played in all the big games now. He probably shares the Lanning chip on the shoulder at this point. He's not going to be scared coming into Columbus. It's going to be one of those games where it's probably going to be a quarterback battle, and Sayan's going to have to, at home, show that he's grown in all the ways that people say he should have and that he says he has. So I think at the quarterback position in general, that's going to be a theme there.
Yeah, Grant, a year ago, we saw Oregon go into State College and beat Penn State. And that's probably the final nail in the coffin of the Penn State football program as a root for last season, because if they didn't win that game, where were they going to go? Like, that was the game. They got the whiteout as a non-Ohio State, a non-Michigan game. It was against Oregon, and they couldn't win. And that was the end. It was the end for James Franklin. But they've gone into big-time environments, and they've won. And this is going to be a big-time environment when they come to Columbus, regardless of what Ohio State has just done. This has the full attention of the Buckeyes, has the full attention of the Ducks. And this game, I actually think, could be the scarlet of the shoe. Again, not based on sourced intel, just what I'm thinking when I look at the schedule, how this goes out. I think this could be the CBS game where it's a scarlet of the shoe kind of atmosphere, 3:30 kick. Regardless, if there's any theme to this matchup, that crowd's going to be ready, and both of those football teams are going to be absolutely locked in, because this is going to be one of the more heavyweight battles that we will see in the college football season. And again, just like Ohio State had been in 2024, and again last year when it got towards the end of the season, the Buckeyes found themselves in another game of the year style matchup with a team. They've got one against Texas, they've got one against Indiana, and they have one here against Oregon again. So 3 massive games for the Buckeyes. That whole defensive line is back for Oregon. And to me, when I look at that and I say, okay, Ohio State, that was their Achilles heel. I have not seen anything be different for them yet, because I've not watched fall camp. I've not seen this football team against another football team on the season. So right now, when I look at that and I see, okay, Bear Alexander is there. We have Mateo Uiagalelei. These guys on that defensive line for Oregon are really talented. They are game wreckers. I don't know how Ohio State's going to be able to run the football. Now they have the talent to do so. I don't know how much time Julian Sain's going to have. I want to see from Ohio State that they can defend a really talented defensive line before I put that much confidence in the offensive line. Now, when I look at the Buckeyes, and I can say on paper, extremely talented, they can win the national championship, they can win the Big Ten. But I really want to see what this team looks like. And we're going to get the evaluation against Texas. We're going to get it again against Indiana. We're going to see what it looks like on the road against USC. But this Oregon game for me is the big one for the offensive line and the defensive line. I know I just said that about Indiana, where that's the game that the offensive line circled, because that's their get right game, because they know why they lost the Big Ten championship, and it was because of the offensive line. But to me, as someone who's analyzing this, I want to see Ohio State's offensive line against Oregon's defensive line, because Indiana's defensive line is not going to be as good as it was a year ago. Oregon's is going to be better than it was a year ago. And this is that, to me, for Ohio State, they have to go ahead and find a way to win this game. And I'm not quite sure that I can confidently say Ohio State can win this game yet because of that reason. So, Grant, I'm going to be the guy that says right now I'm going to give the edge to Oregon because of that. Again, not that I can't be convinced otherwise, but I'm going to lean Oregon here in the early goings until I see evidence on the football field, which I do. Like I said, Ohio State's going to have opportunities. I'm going to lean Oregon here because of that.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be the Grinch. Someone's got to be the Grinch. So it's, it might as well be you. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm in the same boat where, it's a very much a coin flip game, especially because, like I said, the experience, the balance that Oregon has. They have a quarterback coming in who's not going to be phased. The coach certainly not going to be phased either. It could look a lot like the last time Ohio State and Oregon played. Maybe not to the tune of some of the ugly things that happened in that game. But it's not necessarily a lock-in game for Ohio State just because they're at home and they have Jeremiah Smith and Julian Sand, and they have Matt Patricia heading a defense at home. You have the crowd on their back, potentially a Scarlet out. It's gonna be an enormous game to cap off that stretch there. Right now, I lean Ohio State, kind of, I guess, for the same reasons that you aren't leaning. I just think there's a lot of the big plays that Ohio State was probably worried about last time they played Oregon. I would think they're shored those up by now, and the offensive line having come off Indiana and USC. Hopefully, they've gotten the confidence to be able to sustain an offense against Oregon at home, and give them just enough juice to push past an Oregon team coming to Columbus. So I'll take Ohio State, but it's that could change next week for sure.
And no, these are both college football playoff teams, and this game is going to mean a lot for the Big Ten championship race. It really is. And also around the country too, like, how is that going to shape up? Because, Grant, we're talking about Ohio State playing Oregon. We're talking about Ohio State playing USC and Indiana. We know Michigan's down the schedule here in just a couple of games. But a team we're not mentioning is Penn State. And that's because Ohio State doesn't play Penn State this year. But what's tricky about that for the Big Ten championship game is that not every top team plays every top team. And Penn State has a very, very easy schedule by comparison, where it's favorable to them to, they could be 10-2 with one conference loss, or they could be 11-1 and undefeated in conference play, and they could get into the Big Ten championship game, even though nationally Oregon, Indiana, Ohio State, potentially even USC and Michigan are all ranked ahead of them or on paper better than they are. But because their strength of schedule is lower, they're playing the teams on their schedule. And that is just how that's going to be for them this year. Yeah. So they're like the bracket buster. I'll use that terminology right there.
Yeah.
But that could be a factor in this Big Ten championship race where you're like, okay, Ohio State and Oregon are playing here in early November. And this is part one, and we're going to see part two the first week of December.
Yeah, Penn State, right. Penn State has a couple of years where they don't have to play Ohio State, so right. they can make hay. These next couple of years, take advantage of that for sure.
Exactly, because that's been the game that they can't win. Matt Campbell is now there for Penn State, and what are they going to do with this roster? I'll read you Penn State's schedule really quickly. It's Marshall at Temple, Buffalo, Wisconsin at Northwestern, USC at Michigan, Purdue at Washington, Minnesota, Rutgers at Maryland. Wow. I see 2 games on that schedule, USC and at Michigan.
Yeah.
If Penn State splits those games, they're 11-1, and they're likely in the Big Ten championship race. Now, we won't get into tiebreakers right now because that is just a mind game that makes absolutely no sense. And again, a story for another day. But Penn State could be the one that ruins a rematch of either Ohio State, Indiana, Ohio State, Oregon, or potentially Ohio State, Michigan. Long shot there. But okay, I've got Ohio State with 2 losses, Grant. You've got the Buckeyes with 1. We're going to move on to Northwestern. This game is at home against Northwestern. And Ryan Field, the new home of Northwestern, will open in the middle of the season of all times this year. So that's going to be cool for them. Chip Kelly is over there coaching now. Grant, Northwestern, anything stand out to you about the Wildcats? This team, this program, they've been in the Big Ten championship game a couple of times in the last decade, but the last couple of years have not been as favorable to the Wildcats.
Yeah, they were due for a new look, and they're getting that. Fitzgerald moved on, and who knows what he'll be able to do. But now they have Chip Kelly, they have the brand new Ryan Field, which the videos and the photos, it looks pretty incredible. That's a very nice facility, and I think when you project into the future, location of campus, financial ability, being in that Chicago area, and because of their alumni network, it's an incredible school. Apart from the football program, which is being built, obviously, Northwestern has a chance to, ascend past these teams like Iowa and Maryland and so on, and become, that new team that kind of comes in as a spoiler. I think with this new era of college sports, Northwestern may have an avenue to be able to do that. This year, obviously, a little too new. I think they're going to have to get their feet under them. Chip Kelly, due for a good coaching year, I guess you could say. So who knows what he'll be able to do throughout the season. But against Ohio State, that gap is just going to be overwhelming, even in the new stadium.
So Chip Kelly's coming in. They lost a lot of production. They don't have a lot of good linemen coming in the recruiting class. Aiden Childs does come in from Michigan State to play quarterback, so that's a spark for Northwestern. But to me, when I look at this roster, when I look at the coaching staff, and it's no offense to Chip Kelly at all, he has a rebuild to do. And we're talking about Ryan Field because you're getting facility upgrades. That helps you with recruiting, and you've got to be able to attract talent somehow. And I don't know that the on-field product is going to do much to do that. But there's going to be a vision that comes with this program this year, and that's going to be Chip Kelly's focus. Obviously, number one is winning football games, but two, this is a rebuild. What does this look like in 3 years? Is Chip Kelly still there? This program is looking to the future just a little bit. This is going to be the rebuilding year. They're not going to beat Ohio State. I have Ohio State winning this game, as you do too. This is the rebuilding year. How far are they going to be able to get into that? Is it going to be a season where they're 2-10? Is it going to be 6-6? Is it going to be 4-8 and split the difference in the middle? Can they get above 500? I don't think so. But again, they're one of those teams that we're talking about, like Maryland, that's swinging. It's back and forth. Those swing games that you could win, you could lose. Not the guaranteed wins, not the guaranteed losses. This is not one of those swing games for Northwestern. But in those swing games, can they find themselves near or above 500? I don't know that they have the ability to do that this year. 5-7 seems likely, but I don't think, again, the Buckeyes have any issues at home with Northwestern. So I'll go ahead and pick that.
Yeah, got to take Ohio State in this matchup this year, no doubt.
Yeah, we now move into a very interesting matchup for Ohio State. Going to Lincoln, Nebraska the week before Michigan. Now, sometimes these two programs get tripped up the week before each other, not necessarily in a loss, but you end up in a dogfight where it's a little bit more contested than you would have hoped against a lesser opponent. Now, Maryland and Northwestern, we talked about those swing teams. Nebraska, when are they going to take that step forward? They've been the swing team, but we're waiting and waiting and waiting for Matt Rule's Nebraska Cornhuskers to finally say, hey, we're going to bring Nebraska football back to what it used to be. This is a massive spot at home, Grant, for Nebraska and Matt Rule to go ahead and make a statement. Now, you may look and say, well, Dylan Raiola gets another shot at the Buckeyes. Dylan Raiola is not there anymore. He transferred to Oregon. So there's going to be a new quarterback here for Nebraska, and that is going to be Anthony Calandra from UNLV. He is a transfer. He had 23 passing touchdowns and 10 rushing touchdowns a year ago, but interception problems. He has turned the ball over 29 times through the air in 3 years. Now, they're replacing a quarterback. They're replacing running backs. The offensive line, they brought in 3 experienced Power 4 transfer starters. This is problematic when you're playing a team the caliber of Ohio State. Because, again, Ohio State's on a swing game for them. You have a new quarterback, new running back, and you're bringing in transfers on the offensive line. Grant, do you think there's any hope? Again, we'll talk about this like the Iowa game. Do you think that this is a game where Ohio State's on upset alert because of dynamics and because of roster talent that Nebraska has? Or do you think this is a game where Ohio State is just that much better and it would be a shock if the Buckeyes lose? Where does this fall on that spectrum?
I definitely think it's a shock. Anytime Ohio State, loses to a Nebraska team since the Ndamukong Suh, basically, it's just that program hasn't been to the level that, quite honestly, it should be for a long time. Raiola kind of did roll in Nebraska dirty. There's no doubt. And, that'll be an interesting matchup when Nebraska travels to Oregon. Not that Raiola is going to be playing, but, Raiola to transfer out of that program to be a backup and kind of leave them, to pick up a quarterback from UNLV that has issues that they're going to have to coach out of him to be able to make it through a Big Ten schedule where, they play Indiana and Oregon back-to-back weeks in the middle of that schedule. Nebraska has problems of their own. I don't expect Ohio State to lose this game. Obviously, after a long schedule with Michigan the next week for Ohio State, you never know what could happen. It could be a first half blunder, something where they have to come back in the second half and put the foot on the gas. But I feel like Ohio State is past the times of struggling with Nebraska.
Grant, we have looked through Ohio State's schedule. We have seen them go on the road to Texas. We've seen them go on the road to Indiana and to USC. We've seen them host Oregon. We know Michigan's the following week. And you have road games against Iowa and Nebraska sandwiched in there. Those are some tough environments in the Big Ten for the Buckeyes to endure, whether home or away. It's really a schedule that doesn't offer a lot of breathing room and forgiveness for the Buckeyes. Again, they're the superior talented team. It's not one of those woe is Ohio State type of conversations. It is this team is going to be extremely battle tested because even this Nebraska team that we're talking about right now, and you see like the pauses in the voice, the trying to reading of the names on the notes. What is this team going to be? When is it going to be there for Matt Rule where they take that step forward and they're like, you know what, we can finally get to 10 wins. Then Dylan Raiola leaves and you're like, oh, the air just kind of flows out of Lincoln. But now you're going to put it back in it because regardless, no matter what Nebraska season is like, Ohio State's coming to town. And anytime the Buckeyes come to town, that becomes like the Super Bowl for that team. It can change your season. It can save a job. It can do whatever. Again, massive November home game for the Cornhuskers. That crowd always shows out the most loyal fan base in the country in terms of selling out games. I just don't think Ohio State loses. But it's going to come at a cost of playing in a pretty raucous environment. I think Lincoln is going to be bumping that day, whether it's a night game or an afternoon game, probably an afternoon game. I do think that campus is going to be buzzing. That stadium is going to be buzzing. Nebraska's going to have some juice, some trickeration. I just don't think it's going to be enough to beat Ohio State. So I am going to take the Buckeyes to improve to 9-2 heading into the Michigan game. Grant, where are you?
Yeah, I'm there. I'd say 10-1 team at that point. Very battle tested, like you said. Been in environments that are overwhelming. Probably hadn't had a blowout of any sort since the Kent State game at this point in the season. So, as of now, I see them 10-1. But it's, it's treacherous. Just every week, like you said, there's no gimme, even in the Big Ten schedule.
Yeah, so here we go. The game, Ohio State, Michigan. This is going to be the season finale for both teams. Grant, let's see if we can get through this segment without using the names Sharon Moore, Jim Harbaugh, Ward Manuel, and without saying the word scandal. Don't know if that's possible. Yeah. But Kyle Whittingham is now taking over as the head coach at Michigan. Bryce Underwood is back. Savion Hyder, the 5-star running back, extremely talented back for the Wolverines. That tandem is going to be good this year, but how good? Grant, you look at what Michigan is, you look at the state of that athletic department in that program, and it's had a cloud hanging over it this entire off season. And you still see these prediction magazines, you still see these analysts, you still see people saying this is still a top 15 program. It wouldn't feel that way the way the media is talking about them in terms of news, but there's good football players up there. But how good are they? Are they good enough to beat Ohio State? Michigan has won 4 of the last 5. Ohio State finally snapped the streak a year ago. What is this game going to look like? What is this program going to look like under Kyle Whittingham? He's a great coach. He's probably the best option that Michigan could have had to, I'm going to break this rule anyway, replace Sharon Moore and really turn the page from the Jim Harbaugh era. And Whittingham is a great coach. He was outstanding at Utah. He now brings that into Michigan. Identities are very similar in terms of program, in terms of style of coaching. Defense is going to be good. What do you see from Michigan, Grant? Bryce Underwood has to take a step forward this year. He mechanically was off a lot a year ago, and he left some throws on the field against the Buckeyes last year, but now they've got to come to Columbus. And this crowd in Columbus is going to be waiting for him, and I'm sure the signage is going to be pretty entertaining from the fan base.
Yeah, it's a very interesting season for Michigan. Like you said, there's been a lot of happenings in the program lately, but beyond that, the program it's kind of been floating in the wind since Moore had taken over. And Underwood, Bryce Underwood, he's been underwhelming. There's no doubt about it. And for Michigan to be anything close to a 10-win team this season, Underwood has to take a considerable step forward. I don't think there's any doubt that Kyle Whittingham is the right kind of guy to right the ship at Michigan. He's a really good coach, and he's the kind of disciplinarian in the right kind of ways to take over a program like this. So I think as far as coaching goes, I think they're in a good spot. I think that was a really good hire. But you come into the year, Michigan hosts Oklahoma, very good team. John Mateer is coming back. Who knows how good they are? A lot of people have them as a top 6-7 team in the country. Then Michigan, they host Penn State. Who knows what Penn State's going to be like? But they play Indiana, they play Oregon, and they play Ohio State after the Oklahoma game. Michigan has a challenge of their own this year to be able to right the ship, not only in the program, but to get out of this rut that the program's been in for a couple of years. And they were 6-6 one year, or 7-5 one year, going to last year where they weren't able to beat Ohio State. They fall to 9 wins. They can't beat Texas in the postseason. All of a sudden Michigan's back into this lull, that they had to do what they had to do to get out of back in the J.J. McCarthy era. But, this year is going to be a very telling year for Michigan's football program in general.
You look at the schedule, Grant, you're mentioning Oklahoma, you're mentioning Indiana, you're mentioning Oregon, you're mentioning Penn State, and ultimately Ohio State. How many of those games should Michigan win? I think that's the question of, you're saying this is a pivotal year for the Wolverines. Well, I see 5 games that if you look at brands, they could lose games, right? But for Michigan, how many of those games should they win? What really are the expectations in Ann Arbor right now? Because if you see those 5 games, you're like, okay, could this team be 7-5? Could they be 10-2? Could they be better than that or worse than 7-5? I don't think they're worse than 7-5. I think that's the floor right now, unless the wheels really fall off. Not that there's any wheels left. But Kyle Whittingham is there. Kyle Whittingham is a good coach, and he will steady the ship. I think that's the thing. Bryce Underwood is a key factor because he has good coaching around him now to develop him. You saw his mechanics being off a year ago. He just looked unnatural in his throwing motion. He's talented, but how talented can he be at Michigan this year? It's like a redo of his freshman season almost, because he didn't really have intentional quarterback coaching. But Savion Hyder, the new running back at Michigan, that tandem, Can Michigan get back to that old smash mouth football? I think that they can. I just don't think that they're going to have enough to beat Ohio State. So when I'm looking at everything Ohio State has back, Julian Sand, Jeremiah Smith, Brandon Ennis again, you have the transfer receivers in Devin McEwen and Kyle Parker, you have Austin Sarabelt and Carson Hinsman and Luke Montgomery back on that offensive line, Bo Jackson, Isaiah West, Legend Bay. I'm just naming playmakers for the Buckeyes. They know what it's like to beat Michigan now. There are players on Ohio State's roster that know what it's like because they did it last year, and they're going to want to do it again, as always. And I think they're veteran enough to weather any storm that Michigan could throw at them, whether they come out and go 4 wide and Bryce Underwood thinks he's going to sling the ball around the yard all afternoon, or if Michigan wants to line up and play smash mouth football like I expect them to do. Either way, I think Ohio State can play either game and be comfortable and also not flinch. Last year, Julian Sand threw an early pick. Ohio State steadied the ship, and they came back, and they won the game 27-9. Now you're at home. Now you're more veteran. You have the experience. You've done it. The monkey's off your back. There's no pressure. So, Grant, I think Ohio State beats Michigan for a second year in a row.
Yeah, I think, the advantage of Ohio State being able to come back home for this game, again, it's the environment's going to be second to none. Ohio State fans have been waiting to welcome Michigan back after the very shocking loss in 2024 for a long time. There was a lot of disrespect on that field. And I think, beyond the rivalry, a lot of guys in the program have a chip on their shoulder from that game, coaches, players, whatever it be. That combined with, the talent gap that is still probably there. I think Ohio State comes out with a W, finally stretches back-to-back years with a win over Michigan. And, all is right at that point in Columbus. But, yeah, I think, it's an 11-1 Ohio State team, fresh off a home win against Michigan, heading to the playoff. Should be exciting times.
So, Grant, that puts, like you just said, Ohio State at 11-1 in the Big Ten championship game, not losing a conference game for you. I've got the Buckeyes at 10-2. And again, tiebreakers could be a factor here because not everybody at the top of the conference plays everybody. So Ohio State should be in the Big Ten championship game, according to how I've predicted the schedule with a loss to Oregon. But I can't guarantee that. But to Grant, being 11-1, only lost to Texas, the Buckeyes definitely playing in Indianapolis. And here's a little note that I want to leave you guys with today to close the show. Grant, Ohio State has not won the Big Ten since 2020. Okay, so this could be the 6th year in a row that they don't win it, or they could break the streak. The last time Ohio State had a streak that long of not winning at least a share of the Big Ten Conference was from 1986 to 1993. Mm-hmm. So they had a share of the Big Ten Championship in 1986 and a share of the Big Ten Championship in 1993. They did not win a share or outright Big Ten title from 1987 to 1992. So that is how long it's been of a drought for the Buckeyes in terms of winning the Big Ten championship game. So that is a streak that looks to be snapped this season by Ryan Day and the Ohio State Buckeyes. All right, Grant, 10-2 for me, 11-1 for you. Your closing thoughts on the Buckeyes regular season now heading to the Big Ten championship game in your eyes?
Well, as far as enjoying the season itself, week to week, obviously there's a couple of MAC teams in the beginning of the year, but every week you're going to have to tune in to basically every quarter of these games, and you're going to have your eyes glued because we said 10-2, 11-1. Anything could happen in this landscape of college football, especially in this conference with a schedule like this. So every week, just be cognizant of what Ohio State is up against, especially that second half of the schedule with all the traveling and the environments you're going to be playing in. This is going to be a wild year, a very wild year, and every single week.
Grant, when you look at the schedule, how many games of difficulty that Ohio State has where they're really tough games? The ceiling and the floor of the Buckeyes this year, this will be the last thought here. Is there a way in your eyes Ohio State can go undefeated, what do you think the worst possible record could be for the Buckeyes? I do think that a world exists where Ohio State can be undefeated, so I'll go first. I think the floor for this team is 9-3. I think they're too talented. Very difficult games on that schedule. I think the floor is 9-3. I think the ceiling is 12-0. I've got them right now, as we're sitting here in the last week of July, at 10-2.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to agree with you. I think there's always a world where Ohio State can go undefeated. Short of playing, instead of playing Ball State and Kent State, playing Alabama and Georgia on the schedule. There's always going to be that chance at Ohio State. And the floor is definitely 9 wins. You see the Oregon, Indiana, Texas probably as the 3 biggest candidates as losses for Ohio State, assuming USC doesn't sneak up on them. You probably see that as the worst case scenario for Ohio State. But I think that's the floor for a reason. I don't think that's likely. But with a schedule like this, it's possible.
One note too, Ryan Day has never not won 10 games in the regular season at Ohio State, aside from the 2020 COVID year, which again is a special asterisk in all of our stats and info on the show today. But guys, thanks for tracking with us for the entire football season preview for Ohio State in this 2026 season. We look forward to bringing you college football coverage all throughout the season for the Buckeyes. We're going to be there for fall camp, Big Ten Media Days this week. But again, I've got Ohio State 10-2 as of right now. Grant's got them at 11-1, playing for the Big Ten Championship, looking to break that streak. We appreciate you listening to the show. Guys, again, reminder about the TSB Live event at Tailgate Takeover at Dick's House of Sport in Polaris. But also, if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to the show. Be a friend, tell a friend, go ahead and have them subscribe as well. Follow Buckeye Cadence wherever you get your podcasts. Go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Silver Bulletin, on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at tsilverbulletin.com. As make sure they are staying tuned to all the socials. We've got plenty of fun content for you coming to cover the Buckeyes every step of the way this season. For Grant Kincaid, I am Blake Biscardi. We appreciate listening to the show, and we will see you next time. God bless.